All right. Hello, everybody. People are still coming into the room, but we have a great crowd. We have over 300 people joining us tonight. So thank you so much for joining us for this program. If you're in Seattle, the weather is beautiful outside. It's very warm. I'm sure it's very warm in Fort Worth, where there are other guests. George Shackelford is from as well. But we appreciate you spending the time with us tonight virtually. So again, hello, everybody. I'm Philip Natesty, Associate Director of Public Engagement here at the Seattle Art Museum. Thanks for joining us this evening for a conversation between Chiyo Ishikawa, former Deputy Director of Art and Curator of European Painting and Sculpture at SAM, making a return appearance, and George Shackelford, Deputy Director at the Kimbell Art Museum in Fort Worth, Texas. We're here to celebrate the opening of the new exhibition at SAM, Monet at Étretat, which opens to SAM members on June 25th and to the public on July 1st. Before we begin, although we are meeting virtually, I'd like to acknowledge that the Seattle Art Museum is located on the ancestral lands of the Coast Salish peoples. We honor our ongoing connection to these communities, past, present, and future. Of course, SAM is open. Please visit us online for more details of how and when to book your tickets to see Monet at Étretat. Couple notes of thanks as we move forward here. Sam would like to thank this exhibition's lead sponsors, For Culture and the Office of Arts and Culture at the City of Seattle. We'd also like to thank our major sponsor, the Robert Lehman Foundation, and supporting sponsor, Pacifica Law Group, with generous support from Christie's and contributors to the SAM Fund. So tonight, for housekeeping, as questions come up for you, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window, and we'll get to them towards the end of the conversation. We're also using an automated live transcription feature, which is about 80% accurate, which you can toggle on and off using the closed captioning button, also at the bottom of your screen. There's going to be a brief survey as well following the program, so we invite you to please give us feedback on your experience tonight. So now I'd like to welcome our curators to the program here, and I'm going to hand it over to Chiyo and George. Welcome, Chiyo and George.
Thank you, Philip. It's really great to be here. And I'm so happy to be sharing this program with George, who has really shared his knowledge of Monet with me as we've prepared this. I mean, really, the whole impetus for the exhibition goes back to George. So the real impetus for the exhibition is a beautiful painting in our collection. And George, if you start the PowerPoint, we'll remind everybody what that painting is. So here is this single Monet painting in the Seattle Art Museum collection. It's Fishing Boats at Étretat. It was a generous gift from Sarah Hart, who donated it to the museum in 1992. And it remains our only Monet painting, and it's from a period that is probably less well known than some of his other periods. And of course, he has a very long career. And so this is something that we're going to be talking about tonight. The purpose of the show is to put it into the context of the place where it was painted at Étretat, a town on the Normandy coast of France. But our talk tonight, and particularly because of George's expertise, is going to widen the context a little bit and really talk about it in terms of the role of Normandy in Monet's life and career. Well, it is a real joy to be sharing this program with George Shackelford. We've known each other for a really long time, pretty much ever since I started at the Seattle Art Museum 30 years ago. And we worked together on a consortium exhibition. Some of you old timers will remember now I can't remember what it's called, the Gift to America paintings from the Samuel H. Kress collection. And at that time, George was the curator of European painting and sculpture at the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston. After that, he moved north and spent 16 years as chair of the Art of Europe at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. And of course, Boston has a renowned, one of the most historical and important, large, deep collections of Impressionist art, including over 30 Monet paintings. And then since 2012, as Philip said, George has been deputy director of the Kimbell Art Museum in Fort Worth. It was at the Kimbell that George co-organized two landmark exhibitions, bracketing the artist's long career. The first one was Monet, the early years, and the second, Monet, the late years. I hope some of you were able to see those, if not at the Kimbell in San Francisco when they each appeared there. Each of those shows was structured around a single masterpiece in the Kimbell collection. And so when George was visiting here in Seattle a few years ago, it was a natural suggestion for him to encourage me to organize a show around our Monet painting, Fishing Boats at Étretat. I am not a Monet specialist, but George and other very generous colleagues in the field, including Gloria Groom from the Art Institute of Chicago, were so helpful and encouraging. And the result is a very focused exploration of a less well-known moment and place in Monet's life and career. So as I said, tonight's conversation will pull back a little bit to provide a little bit more context for this very narrow focus and look at Monet's relationship to the region of Normandy, where he spent much of his childhood and to which he kept returning throughout his life and ended up settling late in his life, or for the last period of his life. We're going to be looking at Monet's time and our own time a little bit, and you might get itchy to be traveling again after this long period of staying at home as we follow in Monet's footsteps and consider the important role of place in his life and work. So now I'm going to turn it over to George, and we'll kind of go back and forth as we go through.
Thank you. Thank you, Chiyo. It's such a pleasure to be with everyone from Seattle and wherever else you are in this world this evening. I'm sitting here in my office in Fort Worth at the Kimbell and just still mesmerized by the painting that's looking up at me from my computer screen here. I want to let you guys know in Seattle that you may only have one Monet, but it is a really great Monet. And there isn't a single museum in the whole wide world that wouldn't really love to have this beautiful painting. I would love to have it at the Kimbell. Please send it anytime. It's something that the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston doesn't have anything like, in spite of having more than 30 Monets. And it's just a real gem of a picture in beautiful condition, and really and deserves to be famous. And I hope that you will be proud of it as your hometown great Monet picture. It's really a gem. And it sort of sparked a conversation that Chiyo and I had about talking when we were thinking about what to talk about tonight, about the fact that Normandy is Étretat is at the sort of center of Monet's Normandy experience, and it is really at the center of his life. The province of Normandy is, many of you know, sort of on the English Channel. It's to the north and west of Paris, not too far. And it's where the Seine, which flows through the middle of Paris, empties out into the English Channel. We're going to be talking about several spots on the Normandy coast over the course of our well, I guess it's kind of a virtual tour of Normandy that we're going to make. But Étretat is singled out here big in red. Rouen, which is the biggest city in Normandy, is off to the right. Trouville-en-Fleur and Le Havre, which are all around the mouth of the Seine, are off to the left, and then Fécamp and Dieppe, and finally at the bottom right, Giverny, which is just about as far east and south as you can get and still be in the province of Normandy. The part of Normandy that Monet was really interested in is what on a touristic map, I believe this is actually a placemat. And it's called Haute Normandy. You can see it at the top right of the central hallucinogenically colored center of this image, with little views of all of the different places in Normandy that you might like to visit around the edges. And Monet is born in Paris, but moves as a child after his mother's death. His father moves with Monet and the rest of his family, moves to Le Havre, which is a town, as we said, at the very mouth of the Seine, and France's biggest port in terms of all kinds of transatlantic shipping. It's still the port where, if you were on a boat coming into France across the Atlantic, you would still land there. Lots of back and forth across the channel, and a very, very busy port. And his uncle's family was in the business of supplying ships there. Monet grew up there, and his very first exhibited painting, can you believe that he painted this when he was 17 years old? And it was exhibited in 1858, again, when he's only 17. And it was painted side by side with his teacher, Boudin, whose works are also in Monet at Étretat at Sam. The places that Monet painted are often still completely visitable nowadays. And it's a little less true in certain parts of Le Havre, which was bombed very severely during World War II. But in Honfleur, you can walk down the Rue de la Bavole, and it is still looks very, very much like it did in Monet's day. You could stay, there'll be 2 hotel recommendations during this talk. And you can stay at the Ferme Saint-Séméon. It's now quite a luxurious place. It wasn't quite so luxurious when Monet was there. It was a hangout for artists. In fact, this is a painting by Kals. And what I love about this is that you see the very sturdy easel set up in the very middle of the hotel's garden for the various people who were pensioners there to paint at. And the buildings that stand on the edge of the property are those that Monet saw there when he painted along the road just outside the farm in the 1860s. When you go to downtown Honfleur, the inner harbor is just as it was when Monet painted there in the 1860s again. And though the harbor itself has changed a bit, you can see the places that really inspired the early work of the artist. Here's a slide from the show that I did in 2016, where you see those 2 paintings, along with at the center, other paintings from the Kimbell. Now, on the other side of the Seine from Honfleur is Le Havre. And there, a part of Le Havre is called Sainte-Adresse. And it's the coastal edge, the beach edge of Le Havre. And that's where he painted in 1865. Probably from a painting made the year before. He painted this picture, the Pointe de la Hève, that's the name of the point that you see in the distance, at low tide. I tried to take a photograph of this myself that would match the Monet's view, and you cannot do it until it is low tide. You can't get at the angle that Monet painted it at, and the tide drops very precipitously. You can see how deep the water is there. Looking in the other direction, Monet was painting pictures like this one, which I gather, Chiyo, that you have included a film about in your installation.
Yes, there's a video about this painting, which looks so finished and complete. But when you see the video in the exhibition, you'll see that it has an unquiet past, because it originally began as an image of more touristic activity. And then he edited that out, and all of that will be available to see on this video from the Art Institute of Chicago, thanks to their great imaging.
Yeah. The Art Institute owns this painting of the beach at Sainte-Adresse, and it's really it's one of the fascinating pictures. It's the fisherman side. These people are probably gathering seaweed in the Kimbell painting, but this is the picture that he made his first salon impression with in 1865, when he is this young man. It's interesting that many of the places in Le Havre and Sainte-Adresse where he lived are still extant, and I tried to get in touch with the owners of his aunt's property where he lived. And no one would ever answer the telephone or respond to a voicemail message. So when I went to Le Havre and Sainte-Adresse in 2015, I just went to the house, and the door was open. The gate was open. And so my friends and I walked right up the driveway, trespassing like nobody's business, only to find that Monet's aunt's house was long gone. And instead of Monet's aunt's house was this house from probably the late 1880s, long after Monet and the aunt and his father had left the place altogether. But you got a sense, nonetheless, being there, of what the place was like, and you soon learned that it was not beside the sea. There was no view of the sea, and so the famous view of the terrace at Sainte-Adresse, which long ago I thought was his aunt's terrace, is in fact a terrace giving onto the sea from someone else's house, from another kind of house. And then I learned, also visiting this part of Normandy, is that off in the distance to the left of this image, you see a little line of coast. And in fact, what you're doing is looking right back across the estuary of the Seine and further south at the village of Trouville, where Monet would spend his honeymoon in 1870. And here's the beach as he showed it then. And in fact, it's not so very different nowadays, which is really fascinating, that there are lots and lots of buildings from the 19th century still along the beach, these villas that were put up when Trouville was such a fashionable place, made fashionable particularly by the Empress and the Emperor of France. You can still go and find people on the beach, and it's not a particularly, they brought some sand in here. It's a pretty rocky beach in this part of Normandy. Don't go expecting to cushion yourself in deep sand. And it's a place where people sat on the beach in Monet's day. Here's his wife and probably Madame Boudin together on the beach during Monet's honeymoon with Camille Monet, his first wife, in 1870. If you were to stand here, I am convinced that if you went over to the edge of the fence and looked down, you'd see something very unkempt and wild. And this is a painting that many people are unfamiliar with by Monet, but it was a painting that he really liked. He exhibited it again and again. It's in Geneva, and people don't go to the museum there as much as they should and don't know this painting as well. And it's really the inspiration for a whole group of paintings that he would paint almost a generation later, a good 15 years later. He would turn to painting paintings like the one from Boston that you see here, a so-called fisherman's cottage at Sainte-Adresse, excuse me, not at Sainte-Adresse, excuse me, it's at Pourville or Varengeville. And it was built as a customs lookout house, but had been converted subsequently to being a residence for probably a fisherman. And it's the kind of painting of the coast that Monet delighted in. And I think everyone knows all of these paintings that Monet does of the coast of Normandy. And there's a lot of them in the early 1880s, particularly around 1880, 81, 82. He's painting there quite a lot. Many of the paintings I'm showing you are signed 82. And what's really remarkable is how true to life they are and how true to what still stands there. I think, as Chiyo experienced when you were going to Étretat and the spaces along the Normandy coast. So there we are back to Étretat, and this is really where the center of this project lies.
Yeah, so as George has shown you, all along the coast are these beautiful, picturesque scenes. You know, anytime you have coast and water together, there's something interesting to paint. But Étretat has a particular interest because it has these three great cliff formations that flank the little town, which you can see is still not much bigger than it was during Monet's time. It's just nestled in there. Fronting, or the beach fronts it, and the beach is described between two kind of parentheses of formation to the northeast called the Porte d'Amont, and then this one that you see here at the Porte d'Aval, which is a very famous one. You'll have a great view of all of these when you stay at this hotel, the Hotel Dormy, which George recommended to me. And the great thing about it, besides the view that you have, is you can walk right up onto the cliff from the back door and put yourself in Monet's footsteps. Monet himself stayed in a hotel. He stayed in this hotel, the Hotel Blanquet, which was popular enough with artists who were drawn to the city that they sometimes called it the Hotel des Artistes. And he painted, I'll point out, if you look at that top window there and then imagine around the other side facing the water is where he painted at least one of the paintings from the exhibition. So here is that great formation to the northeast, the Porte d'Amont, with these are all limestone cliffs that have these piercings that are very picturesque and evocative. Next, George. And here is one of the ways that he treats it. When you now, our show is small. It's a very focused exhibition. There are 10 Monet paintings, but even in these 10 works, you have the opportunity to think about what he is, the variety of approaches that he can take to painting. And in a work like this, he's painting all of these, or at least beginning all of them on site. This is a small work, probably never meant to be displayed, but meant as a sketch that he can take back as a seed for a larger scale painting. And he does do a version of this composition later on, but he was eager to capture that beautiful early morning light. This is the most iconic view of Étretat, and that's because this arch, the Porte d'Aval, is both so dramatic with a kind of flying buttress and the needle pointing up, but it's also very accessible. You can see it right from the beach in town. You can almost walk there. You can walk right up over the top of it. And so this is the one that we'll see some other artists working there and photographers. And this is the view that is kind of etched in people's minds. And it's interesting as we go on to think about Monet choosing to paint a site that is so familiar to people. Étretat has become a popular tourist destination by this time. Once the railroad came in, all of Normandy was more accessible to tourists from Paris. People came from across the English Channel too. And one of the things he was drawn to again and again, kind of in anticipation of the serial practice he'll have in the 1890s, is looking at the same site at different times of day and in different weather conditions. So George, I think, has a sequence of shots here that he took as the light changed. And you notice how when the light goes away, the surface becomes flatter. And we see the kind of changing sculptural form of these great cliffs through Monet's paintings. And it's why when his wife is saying, "Why aren't you coming home?" he keeps saying, "I still have more to do. I want to come home too, but I don't know when I'll be finished." And it's because he continues to be captivated by the variations that he sees from day to day. Here, as he's there in the fall of 1885, a rare sunny day. We find him in his letters complaining about the weather. Here is a stormy day. He could just barely step outside of his hotel and paint this stormy sea, and makes a point of using the same colors in the water that you see in the cliff and the sky as a way of tying the whole picture together and creating a pictorial harmony, even though it's a painting about turbulence and the violence of nature. And then the beach. Now, the most people went to Étretat in the summer when fishing activity had stopped. Monet consciously chose to go there in the off season because he wasn't interested in painting paintings of tourists. He liked the boats, and having grown up in Le Havre, he was very familiar with boats. He knew how they worked. He drew lots of boats in his sketchbooks, and he wrote to Alice Hochet, his companion, about how beautiful and colorful and lively the boats were. They cheered him up in the grayness of unending stormy days. And this is a painting that I mentioned, painting from his hotel room on the 4th floor. When the boats can't go out, the fishermen can't go out, you can see the sea is too stormy. That means Monet can't go out either. And so he was delighted that he found he could still not waste a day, he could work. He seems to have been the most productive and had the strongest work ethic that I can imagine. In the foreground there, you see those kind of shaggy looking huts. Those are actually boats that are no longer seaworthy. And they would roof them with either thatch, like you see here, or with planks, and use them for storage or even little dwellings. So part of the kind of picturesqueness of Étretat, but not the conventional, beautiful notion of the picturesque.
Not
Monet,
at all.
no, and Monet, you know, I think that so many, we tend to think of Monet as the painter of pretty pictures, but he thought of himself as wanting to paint tough subjects. And I think that these boat paintings, in a way, and your little, you know, unpicturesque hut, I think those are tough paintings for him. He's kind of going against audience expectations, to the chagrin of his dealer, who was always wanting him to make beautiful, saleable paintings.
I can't imagine that this was very saleable.
No, well, and these works did, I mean, he kept our painting until 1900. So yeah, I mean, and certainly at this time, the notion of finish was, he achieves it in some cases, but that's not what he's always going for. And he, incidentally, in terms of the painting outside, he intended to start paintings here and then finish them back in his studio. And so many of these works, including this painting from the Art Institute, show evidence of going back and changing the composition a little bit, maybe adding a little bit of froth at the shoreline there where the waves are crashing against the shore. So here is another view of the boats stuck on the shore on a stormy day. And then lo and behold, the weather clears, the water is calm, the sails can go up, and the boats can glide out over the now still water. Amazingly, these are two paintings in the collection of the Art Institute of Chicago. They're not quite the same size, so he didn't intend them to be sequential, but when you see them side by side, it's almost a cinematic moment.
You really can go back and forth and between them in a wonderful way.
Yeah, you just want to take off your coat in that other one.
Yeah.
And so Monet, while he was here, he was constantly seeking novel views, wanting to do something that others had not. And so one thing that he did was come around the backside of the Port d'Aval and get himself down to the beach, where he could paint a view of the arch from the other side, so that you don't have any inkling that there is a town there. And this is another rare sunny day, and I just feel him painting slowly and enjoying the sunshine in this painting. It seems like the epitome of a relaxing day painting at the beach. But if we go to the next one, I think that you turn your back on the view that we just looked at, and this is what you see, the ferocious Manaport, which is the largest cliff a little bit southwest of town, kind of like, you know, the jaws of a great monster or something like that. And he really made this his own. When he first went there in 1883, he was delighted to discover a view from below. And that meant he had to clamber down a nearly vertical cliff with all his stuff and paint it from below. But he got the kind of ferocity and scale of it, and the almost sublime, kind of awe-inspiring power that it has. Here's a photograph of it from below right now, and you can see that he had to wait until the tide went out to be able to go down there. And there was an episode where he miscalculated the tides and actually got swept away and barely crawled back with everything, still alive. He lost all his painting materials. But this is a painting that kind of captures that sense of explosiveness of the water breaking on the cliff. And this is a work that is very much not finished. And we have a letter from Durand Ruel asking him to finish this painting. And he wrote back and said, you know, if you don't want it this way, I'm happy to keep it. And he sold it 2 years later to John Singer Sargent, the great American artist with whom he had a wonderful affinity for this very fluid and swift brushwork. They were great pals.
And Sargent totally understood it very clearly. I mean, it's
yes.
exactly the kind of painting that he would get and say, don't touch, don't
add another thing. Yeah. It's got, I mean, this is one reason our last gallery is 8 paintings, and you look from one to the other and you see all range of finish and response to the moment. It's really a thrilling experience.
I mean, when you compare, just to go back, when you compare it to the painting from the Clark, which is so tenderly finished, and really, I mean, all of those little hint where he goes back at the end and puts all of that bright blue in to get the reflection of the bright blue sky in the ripples in the water down at the lower left-hand corner. It's so I don't want to say picky, but it's careful. It's really careful, and then almost to suggest the kind of awesomeness of awesome is a horrible word, but if you look at the top of the screen and see all those little tiny dots, those are people.
Right.
And this cliff is immense. And I think you needed something bold like this to really to capture it best.
Yes. Yeah. And nobody else had done it. I mean, lots of people had done some of the more conventional views, but this thing was, was his, and it's so bold and tough as he was seeking. But you can see what draws him again and again, all the different positions and high and low perspectives. This is a distant view of that same arch. And to me, the distant view and looking on it from above kind of tames it a little bit. It doesn't have that brightening quality that the other one does. I mean, or that the real thing in person does, which is, terrifying.
No, this is much more gentle. Much more, and he's interested in something else, It's the so-called envelope that he's that he talks about,
right? Which makes me think that this must come late in the period, because while he's here, he's seeking novel motifs. He wants to pick the thing he's going to paint and then do it in an original way. But as he's working there more and he's painting the same things again and again, this is a work that is really about the atmosphere, that whole band on the left of the way that the water slides into the misty air. It's just beautiful. And it doesn't really come across in a reproduction. It was when we unpacked the painting, and you feel that air. And of course, that's what will, become his primary focus in a very short time.
Absolutely. It takes your breath away. Étretat really, it was such a touristic place. I mean, whether Courbet painting there, Corot painting there. I love this one by a almost forgotten artist named Poitevin. And this shows you what other people thought Étretat was. But Monet was interested in this part of Étretat, fishermen.
Right.
Those crusty boats. There you go. This is a great view, Chiyo, of the planked boat. But you were pointing out to me the juxtaposition that we see in this photograph between work and play.
Yeah. So you have the boats, which are there all year round, and then those little cubes at the center of the picture are probably the bathing cabins where people would change their clothes. And so, you have here kind of the mingled identities of the place that Monet himself chose not to admit into his images.
Absolutely. As far as Monet was concerned, none of that was around. And that started with this is his visit there in the 1860s. It's not his very first visit, but it's the first one that makes for a great picture. This one in a private collection.
Which is not in our show. I'm
not in the show. I'm very sorry to say this. We included this even though it is in the show because It wasn't in my show in Fort Worth either. So it's not just you, Chiyo. It belongs. It's still in private hands, and the collector who owns it is very, very attached to it and doesn't want to live without it. And it will go to a museum in due course. So that we'll all get to see
it then.
Yeah. But it's just a terrific picture, and I love the way he rhymes the striation of the sky with the layers of sedimentary deposit, rock, this amazing stone that has then been carved away by water and wind. From the coast, he goes to the coast in this period from the new place that he has moved in 1883. And after the death of his first wife, Camille, who you saw under her umbrella at the beach, Monet becomes the partner of Alice Auchedet, who is the wife of a friend. The two couples were friends. Camille dies. Alice and her husband, Ernest, become estranged. She and Monet begin to live together, and they move together to this town. No one is, really living there to any great extent, called Giverny, where they can gather their large and growing assembled family, because each of them has children. The Monet children, one of them eventually marries one of the Auchedet children. The Auchedet girls all get married to other people as well, and the family really sort of burgeons, so that this painting, which is at probably the end, this photograph at the end of the 80s, shows you how big the family group has gotten. And Giverny is probably one of the most important tourist sites in all of France. It is, as I said, about as close to Paris as you can get and still be in Normandy. It's a quick train ride or a bus ride or a car ride, depending on how you want to go. And it's there that Monet and Alice and their two families settle in 1883. And the town is remarkably untouched. I mean, maybe very carefully untouched. For all that it's a tourist destination, if you're there outside the tourist season, it's just a little town still fundamentally. And it's in the middle of the country. And Monet was painting, this is a haystack from a haystack picture from the Boston collection. And the haystacks are still the hay is still being mown in the fields around Giverny even now. And when he paints the grain stacks in the fields around and above the town, and this is where he evolves in the late 80s and early 1890s, his whole practice of painting in series and painting these pictures where he stays with one motif and paints it under different conditions of light and air. And these are all wintry, but he could do exactly the same kinds of things on the coast in the summertime. And here's north of Étretat, north and to the further east of Étretat. This is at Dieppe, Pourville, and he's painting the coast there with these undulating forms that he's kind of rhyming with Japanese prints, and does these paintings also in series, these all from 1897. But by this time, he's really, the place that he is beginning to focus on more and more is his house. And as he grows older, he's going to be 60 years old in 1900, and he begins to sort of constrict his circle or his circuit of travel. And the Norman coast is about as far as he goes, with one exception of going off to Norway unexplicably at a certain point later on. But the house, the garden, the structured garden just by the house, which he inherits when he buys the house, when he rents the house in 1883 and then buys it after the haystack exhibition. He's able to grow the garden. It's changed over time, but not that much. and still the paths filled with blooming flowers. The May is my recommended time, and in the middle of the week. Do not go on the weekend if you can possibly avoid it. When I was there with friends in May, you'll see a picture. The wisteria was blooming. The water lilies weren't yet blooming. This is earlier in the spring. This is the peony garden with sheds to protect the flowers. This is early in the spring with tulips blooming. Iris is planted in profusion as well. And then after around about 1899 or so, 1890, I guess, 91, 92, he buys some property across the road from the main house and puts together his first little water garden. He starts ordering plants for that and makes the first plantings and begins to paint on the side of the banks there. This is from the first campaign of water lilies that he does in 1897, 98. And then he enlarges the pond in 1901, and he's painting the Japanese bridge. There it is, probably in May. And here I am with my friends Nancy and Robin under the wisteria in 2015. But the garden is, the water garden is very, very close to the photographs that we know of the time. And it's really, it really is all about reflection and atmosphere. And the view that he gets sort of beneath the bridge is the view that he eventually turns into the pure painting of the surface of the water, with these island clusters of water lily pads and flowers, creating these horizontals against the prevailing vertical of the reflected image in the water. And this is this is something that carries through into his entire production of the water lilies. As you see, this is a view of the beginning of the Monet, the late years, in 2019. And the garden is a place that becomes famous. I mean, there he is with Clemenceau, who was one of his very dearest friends since the 1860s, and with visitors from Japan. Or on the right with Bonnard, who becomes a neighbor of his when Bonnard buys a house near in a nearby town of Vernon nearby. And he becomes a celebrity. Monet is by 1915, when the screenwriter, actor, director, filmmaker Sacha Guitry visits Monet to film in the garden in the summer of 1915, bringing his little dogs with him. The little dogs that you'll see coming down the path right now is actually Guitry's dog and not Monet's. They're standing in the alley straight in front of the house. The house is in the background, and then they move across the road and the railroad to the garden. There's the Japanese bridge that you see, and Monet is at work on a very large canvas that is 2 by 2 meters, which is to say about 6'6" or so. And Monet himself is about 5'8". So the painting is really much bigger than he is. And here he is looking at that reflection in the water, the vertical pattern of the reflected leaves of the willow tree, crossed by the horizontal patterning of the water lily pads. And he's looking, touching. He touches his brush, often touching it 2 or 3 times to the palette, so that he picks up more than one color at once, and then touches it back to the big canvas, which you can see kind of bouncing as he pushes his brush into it. Now he's painting for a cameraman, but nonetheless, we know the painting that he's working on, and indeed it is absolutely a wonderful picture that represents this habit of looking that that he gets into when he's painting in this garden. And these are the kinds of big paintings that he's making. These are all more than 6 feet tall, all of these, and these are somewhat smaller, but it's all of the facets of the garden. And as you know, he puts these giant pictures together and creates these panoramas.
And by this time, George, I mean, we have to say he's painting for himself, right?
Completely.
Gone are those concerns of satisfying the public and making domestically scaled works that are finished. And, you know, he's not thinking about that anymore because he doesn't have to.
Absolutely. He's got enough money to where he can self-finance this vast painting project. I mean, imagine the amounts of canvas and paint that is required to do this series of literally yards and yards and yards and yards of fabric. And it's expensive because he has the people come to Giverny on the train and stretch the canvases in his studio. He's moving them all around. He builds a giant studio that's now the gift shop at the garden to paint in with a great skylight. And it's a huge project for him. And the paintings are huge. And here's a view of the triptych that the centerpiece is in St. Louis, and part at the right is in Cleveland, and part at the left is in Kansas City. And here they all are gathered together in Kansas City a few years ago. And here's the triptych from the Museum of Modern Art that is very close in terms of its fascination with big reflected clouds to one of the passages on the right-hand side here, the left-hand side rather, in the Orangerie. And this is where the paintings end up. Many of our listeners may have been to these two amazing oval rooms at the Orangerie in the Tuileries Garden in Paris. It's part of the Musée d'Orsay now, and these rooms, you can go and really lose yourself in the picture. You can get so close that you can't see anything else, and you begin to, in a way, kind of sink into the painting, and to be completely surrounded by this, well, as Romy Galan, an art historian, called it, quoting, I guess, Bergson, the oceanic sensations that you have as you, this sort of sense of being lost in the in this amazing landscape. And so they are part of Monet's Normandy experience, even though they are now kind of a world apart. And from Étretat to Giverny, we have really covered the waterfront, shall we say, of Monet's Normandy.
George, I mean, this is a goofy question to put you on the spot with, but he has a nearly 70-year career, 1850s to mid 1920s. And can you, could you reduce it to a through line? Like, what relates, the painting in our collection, for example, with where he goes?
The prevailing underlying rule of Monet, the reason of Monet, is something that he says himself, that he wants from the beginning and always to become a means whereby what he sees can be translated through his intelligence and the action of his hand into a work of art. So it's the absorption of the natural world, the understanding of it visually, fundamentally visually, and the transcription of that into paint is his raison d'etre. And he's very, at the end of his life, he's very clear about that. This is then and has always been what he is interested in doing. And so standing standing above the beach at Étretat, looking down at those fishing boats their tangle of masts and nets and the ropes that are sort of tying them to the bollards sunk into the pebbly sand. He is trying hard to make visual sense out of a kind of cacophony of stimuli there at Étretat on the beach, and to make something of it that will render the sensation that he has had to you and me.
Mm-hmm.
And that he is able to do that again and again. At least for me, he's able to do it. And I know for you, he's able to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people, he is able to do it whenever they go to see a work by him. And he succeeds.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Chiyo and George, it's Philip here coming.
Philip.
And I know that you're I'm not spotlighted just yet, but we have a lot of questions coming in from the audience, obviously. But just on that note, just kind of talking about Monet's process and how he approaches the work. But in this transition period, George, you noted kind of moving to this panoramic phase. But there's a question from an audience member. Is it true that he painted in the large format because he was or may have been losing his vision? So trying to kind of like latch onto that moment when it went from very small, from some of the paintings that we see in this exhibition, to the very panoramic paintings that we see later.
Interestingly enough, while he is painting those giant canvases, he's also painting pictures that are smaller than sofa size. I mean, he goes back to paintings that are, say, 30 inches across, not huge, but some that are a full meter across, so 39 inches or so, and he paints. But while he's painting a painting that might be 2 meters wide by 1 meter tall, he's also painting a picture that is 4 times as big. That is to say, 4 meters wide by 2 meters tall. But and all scales, even at the very end, he's going back and painting easel canvases as well. I think that it's I resist attributing the way Monet's late paintings look specifically to his deteriorating eyesight. While his eyesight certainly was deteriorating and he had terrible problems with cataracts, and he was very, very aware of all of this, he paints fluidly and in a big way when he can see perfectly well. And he paints. There are elements of his biggest paintings that if you look carefully at them, you'll realize that they are very strongly, very carefully calculated, particularly when he, as I was talking about earlier, when he picks up 2 colors on the same brush, he knows what he's doing. It's not an accident that a yellow and a vermilion dot of paint can be blended together in one stroke into something that does something that neither one of the two would have done by itself. And so he's absolutely able to calculate that, even when he in 1915 is not seeing so very well.
Thanks for that. I mean, we're looking at this beautiful picture of the cliffs here on the right here on the screen. And one of our earliest questions, I think, George, is the last time you were in 2015 in Étretat?
Yeah, it's been now 6 years since I was there.
Yeah, and Chiyo, when was the last time when you were?
2017.
2017. So
yeah,
we have a question just from somebody who hasn't been there, like myself. Is Étretat still a tourist center? Is it still a place of travel?
Yes, I mean, yeah. It's definitely worth visiting, and it's very charming. When I first started working on this years ago, I gave a members lecture and was talking about Étretat, and I put a slide with Cannon Beach in Oregon, which is another beautiful coastline view with dramatic land formations. But if you turn your camera the other direction, you see a boardwalk and all kinds of sort of tawdry, well, not tawdry, but just very colorful visual competition for the beauty of pure nature.
Man-made.
Yes, man-made. Étretat is not like that. It is the town kind of recedes from the experience of the landscape. And there are plenty of places to stay. I think when I was there in October, there were school kids on holiday, but it was, I think a lot of people come in just for the day because you can take train to the Ave and then you take a bus and then you can go back if you want. So it's definitely worth visiting. And those of you who are watching the series Lupin on Netflix, you'll have seen Étretat.
Great show.
Now there's another reason to go there is the museum of Arsène Lupin, which I did not visit. But I think, if you like a vacation also that includes some physical element of walking and you see the shifting views, that it's a very, very pleasant place to be. And you'll get a little bit of a workout too, because there's some up and down.
There's a lot of up and down, and as you see in the photograph on the right here, there's a golf course on top of the cliff. So if you're a golfer and I don't know how you make arrangements to golf there, but I bet you can. Mm-hmm. And probably that hotel can tell you how to golf there, don't you think, Chiyo?
Yes. Oh yes.
The Clifftop Hotel really is just as charming as it can be. But there are hotels in town and restaurants and soft serve ice cream and all of the accoutrements of a kind of there's a little bit of Atlantic City in it, as well as being a completely charming Normandy town. And Normandy in and of itself, the minute you get out of any of the tourist centers, it's country. I mean, it's the countryside and just lovely. Lovely, beautiful, rolling landscapes.
I see a few more questions coming in here, but we only have time for one more, I think. But let's see. I always like ending on this, but we know that there's a new exhibition. The new exhibition is opening at SAM, but within what's being shown at SAM, I know that this entire exhibition is based on kind of the premise of the one painting, but which is your favorite? And if so, why?
Well, it is an interesting question because as we were talking about those Étretat paintings, how one is just exuberantly brisk and violent, and then another one is just tender. It is kind of hard to pick one because the experience of the show is seeing the whole range of effects and approaches. But maybe the one from the Barberini Museum is a real stunner. It's the one that has this kind of chartreuse strip of grass across the top of the cliff. And it was, the sunny day was a rare thing as he was painting. And there is just a boldness and a complete confidence in that painting. And it's also got the cool water, the hot color of the grass on the cliff. It just seems to embody a kind of autumnal moment at Étretat. But really, I think they're all wonderful in their own ways, of course.
I will say that for me it would be a hard choice between the painting from the Clark, which is the bright blue sky and the needle half in shadow, half in light, and the Seattle painting, mm-hmm. which is the kind of painting that you will not forget once you have seen it. And it is, and I think a painting that can stay in your mind and hold its own in your memory is something that a museum wants to have. I mean, I would, like I said earlier, I would be so pleased if somebody had said, "Do you want to give this painting to the Kimbell Art Museum?" I'd say, "Yes, sirree. I would love to have it." And so, no, it's a great picture, and it really is such a perfect provocation for a wonderful exploration of an idea and a place.
Yes. And of course, that is what I meant to say, that actually the Seattle Art Museum painting is my favorite painting. It is, I mean, it's true. And George, I will say it gets better and better every time you look at it. It gets stronger and stronger. We got a beautiful frame for it. And
yeah,
it's
Phil's question was, which one would you like to keep? That will
okay,
otherwise
there we go.
it's a better way
okay.
to phrase it.
In that case, yeah.
George, I'll actually ask you to share your screen, because I think your next slide was the painting.
Okay, certainly.
Yeah, and we can end there.
And I don't know how it went off screen. And there.
No worries.
Yeah, there we have it.
Yeah,
so this is a zoomed in detail, but you can see just how energetic and sophisticated his paint is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we're at time.
Oh, never mind.
Go ahead, Chiyo. Go ahead.
Well, I just was going to say Nick Dorman, our great conservator, has been studying this painting closely. There's a real thorough kind of dissection of it in a section of the exhibition. He's really studied it closely, and he said, you know, that yellow paint on that boat is added later. And I said, well, no, that doesn't fit with the historical record, because Desmond Fitzgerald, when he went to visit Monet in 1900, said that he told Monet, don't add a thing, because that was something he would do. He wouldn't sign it until he sold it, typically, and he might want to touch something up before he let it go. And supposedly the buyer said, don't do that. And we have a photograph from December 1900. I think Fitzgerald was there in the summer. Photograph from 1900 in Monet's studio, and you don't see that lighter colored paint. It looks like the boat is entirely black. So this painting still has some mysteries I think the physical evidence, I will trust Nick, but to now try to make that historical record match this finding is still work to be done.
Sometimes yellow reads as black on certain kinds of film. So there you go.
Well, George, I want that to be right.
It's true. I know it is. Yeah.
Well,
I will get onto this later.
I'm going to follow up with you. Yeah.
With pleasure.
But anyway, thank you.
It sounds like there may be another program with Nick.
Yeah.
I want to thank both George and Chiyo for introducing the exhibition, giving us kind of a full picture highlight of Étretat and Monet at this period. It was such a pleasure learning from you, and especially to our audience. We had 400 people here with us.
Wow.
To just be able to learn and share this together. So thank you so much to everybody. Thank you to Kari, who's in the background in our AV, making sure everything's running smoothly. But I appreciate everybody being here tonight, and I hope everybody gets a good night's rest.
Thank you. And thank you, George. It was just wonderful working with you again.
Thank you,
Philip. And
thank you, Chiyo.
everybody.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Kari, for inviting me. And I'll come back anytime.